It is my pleasure to introduce this spring's Margaret and Herman Sokol Science Lecturer, Dr. James A. Levine. Dr. Levine received his doctorate in philosophy and doctorate of medicine from the Royal Free Hospital, Department of Medicine, London, in 1988 and 91, respectively. He became a fellow in endocrinology at the Mayo Graduate School of Medicine in 1995 to 1998 and remained at the Mayo Clinic till this past year, when he began his current position as Chief of Endocrinology at Case Western University Reserve Hospital. He has appeared in documentaries on BBC, NBC, ABC, and Fox, and he was also awarded the 2008 International Innovator Award. In addition, he was awarded the 2009 Lancet Wakely Prize for International Health. He has published in Science, Lancet, and the Royal Society, and he's also an associate editor at Diabetes. In addition to being a prolific scientist, and an innovative inventor, he also writes poetry. He was a finalist in the Slam Poetry World Championship competition in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2006. I'd like to end this with a personal story of James Levine's versatility. Last year, I was in a library working on a project that I was co-authoring with James Levine, and I decided to stand up and stretch my legs, which you're going to find out today is a very good thing to do. And I was wandering around the library looking at some new fiction, and I noticed that one of the books had been written by another guy named James A. Levine in the fiction section. So curious, I picked up the book and opened up the flap to look at an image of the author, and I found that this author looked a lot like James A. Levine. In fact, it took me a few minutes to understand that I was looking at one and the same James A. Levine, who has written 2 fiction books. Last year, he wrote a book called The Blue Notebook, in addition to all his other achievements. So, with this, I'd like you to join with me in extending a warm Garden State welcome to our distinguished speaker, Dr. James A. Levine.
Diana, thank you very much. Hey, thank you all very much indeed. What a pleasure and delight and honor to be here. And I'm going to talk today about NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And this is something I've been working on for, as we were talking about earlier, the last 30 years. I was looking at snails when I was age 9, trying to work out why they wander in their squiggly, wiggly way. And I found out only today at Montclair. So NEAT is what I'm going to talk about. To preface it, the area of interest is obesity. I'm not going to spend much time going through the obesity epidemic. I'm just going to make 4 key points. Every single day you pick up the newspaper and you read about the fact that obesity affects a third of the US population, 2/3 of adults are overweight, half of our children have significant weight issues. And the point, however, I'd like to make is that obesity affects every single organ system of the body. But most importantly, when I sit in clinic and talk to a patient with obesity, what they tell me is that 5 times an hour they feel overweight, 5 times an hour they feel set upon, 5 times an hour they feel discriminated against in society. It is the personal pain which overreaches and overarches all of the medical complications that we strive to treat. The second point I'd like to make is that 200 years ago, there really wasn't much obesity. In fact, in the Lancet of about 211 years ago, there was a case report of somebody with obesity. And the point here is that as societies evolved with the Industrial Revolution and now the technological and computer revolution, what we are immersed upon, what we're blanketed by, is a gentle, enticing, seducing invitation to spend our lives sedentary. Call it the chair sentence. The third point I'd like to make, which has proven to be critical with respect to deploying real-world solutions, is the following. On the lower axis, you see the number of risks associated with obesity, hyperlipidemia, cholesterol, diabetes, and so on. On the far axis, you see BMI, body mass index, a measure of obesity. And on the near axis, you see the almighty dollar. And what one sees is that for a patient with multiple risk factors with obesity, they are costing their self-insured company, they're costing medical, in associated medical costs, $7,000 a year more than an individual who's lean and without those complications. The cost of obesity accounts for about 60% of the total US health budget. And the last point I'd like to make is obesity is not an America-centric problem. It's not only based in the United States. Half of children in half of children in Beijing have obesity. Obesity is emerging in India so fast that it is thought to be accelerating sufficiently quickly as to quelch the growth in the Indian economy. So what is it, the chair or the fork? Well, I got into Montclair late last night, about 11 o'clock, and I went to the hotel. And I was sitting there in the restaurant, actually starving hungry, I might add, and I was sitting watching sport, and the bloke next to me asked, why are you in town? And I explained, here to give a lecture about obesity. And he said, it's really, really simple, isn't it? We eat too much. It's the fork. And I said, but before I could actually say anything else, the bloke on the other side, the gentleman on the other side to me said, no, it's not that we eat too much, it's we're too lazy. All of us spend our lives in the chair. And I was about to say, well, it's not just that. But before I could actually interject, the two gentlemen got into a fight. It wasn't pretty at all. Being English, of course, I stepped back. And the New Jersey police are really very pleasant. But suffice it to say, it isn't the chair and it isn't the fork, it is the combination of both. If you look at this analysis over the last 150 years, on the top you see energy intake. And what one sees, and this is accumulation of multiple studies from multiple countries, is that over that period of time, for example, in the United States, energy intake hasn't actually increased. In the United Kingdom, energy intake has actually decreased where obesity rates have doubled. The only country that's actually shown an increment in energy intake is Australia, and that's about 100 calories a day. But what you have seen concomitantly is a decline in energy expenditure. So that any individual or any population with obesity is a product of a combination of inappropriately high energy intake coupled with low energy expenditure. It is the combination of both. And talking about obesity without reference of one to the other is like talking about cut silverware, a knife without a fork without a knife, a fight without New Jersey police. Here's a cross-sectional analysis. You'll see many such things. It's really just to make a point. On the lower axis, you see the percentage of the US population with obesity. These are federal data and Haynes data, so of course they're from the government, we must believe them. And on the red axis, you see energy intake. And what you see is no obvious relationship between energy intake and the percentage of the US population with obesity. On the near vertical axis, what one sees is the number of ride-upon lawnmowers, dishwashers, washing machines, and so on and so forth. And of course, I came from Minnesota, and it appears that in Cleveland there's even more snow than in Minnesota, and there you have ride-on snowblowers. The emergence of these effort-saving, energy-saving technologies is of course associated, along with our computers, the progressive decline in energy expenditure. So as we think about the decline in energy expenditure, the first question one asks is what are the components thereof? What are the components of energy expenditure? Here are the ways that a sedentary US or UK person burns calories. Basal metabolic rate accounts for about 60% of the total. And the important thing about basal metabolic rate is that 73% of the variability, nearly all of the variance in basal metabolic rate is accounted for by body size. The bigger you are, that was beautiful. Wasn't that? We practiced that for hours. I'm sorry to have destroyed it. The bigger the basal metabolic rate, the bigger the person. The smaller the person, the smaller their basal metabolic rate. The thermic effect of food is the energy expenditure of converting raw food into intermediary metabolites. Sorry about that. The remainder is activity. Now remember, activity comprises of exercise and non-exercise activity. If that's my mum, tell her I will definitely call back later. Remember that for 98% of world dwellers, their exercise is zero. For more than 90% of my patients with obesity, they take no exercise. Even for those people who religiously go to the gym 3 times a week. you spend an hour going to the gym, even for them, the cumulative effect of exercise is about 80 calories a day when you average it out. Because imagine going to the gym, take 20 minutes to get there, 10 minutes to change, 20 minutes to do the class, whatever it may or may not be. And then, of course, the biggest barrier to going to the gym, and the data suggests this, is actually hair restyling, which is obviously not my problem. But then also there's 20 minutes to get back. And so you imagine doing 3 of those bouts for a week. On average, that averages about 70 calories a day. And so for most people, even those who go to the gym 3 times a week, and certainly for the vast majority of those with obesity, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, must account for the variability in energy expenditure that is not accounted for by body size. So if you look at the data on the variability of energy expenditure in free-living people from an industrialized, civilized country, and that would be Great Britain, what one sees here is age on the x-axis and total energy expenditure here on the vertical axis. And this isn't a sneeze plot, whereby I sort of was preparing the slide and actually sneezed straight onto the piece of paper. These are actual data. And the point of the data are that 2 people of similar size, this person has a similar size to that person, 2 people of similar size living in sedentary Great Britain, the data are the same for the United States, I assure you, have a vastly different total daily energy expenditure. And in fact, 2 people of similar size vary in their total daily energy expenditure by 2,000 calories. Now, right, that can't be from basal metabolic rate. It can't be, because basal metabolic rate is the size-corrected variable. So the only way to explain why 2 people of similar size can burn 2,000 calories a day more one than another has to be because of variability in non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or at least activity thermogenesis in total. But remembering, of course, that most people don't exercise, this huge variability in total daily energy expenditure is accounted for by non-exercise activity. Why is that? There are 2 reasons. First of all, jobs are highly, highly variable with respect to the energy they expend. If you take a chair-bound student, they're NEAT. And in fact, we actually did a measurement in a student in Zimbabwe who had a NEAT of 0. She actually slept the entire day. I know from the dean this does not happen at Montclair, but you take an individual with a highly sedentary job, they can get their NEAT, their non-exercise activity, down to 300 calories a day. You transpose the entire faculty of Montclair University into sub-Saharan Africa and you put them to work in agriculture, which I understand there is a plan to do. Their NEAT potentially increases from 300 calories a day to 2,300 calories a day. So work is a tremendous determinant of the calories a person burns. It's not only work, however, it's what one does in one's leisure time. This is an indirect calorimeter. We make them very precisely. And what it enables us to do is to measure the calories of different activities. So the first thing I'll show you is, this is gum chewing. Now, I made a terrible mistake. I've never actually received so much hate mail and death threats as a scientist as when we published this paper, I do hate to tell you, in the New England Journal of Medicine. What it demonstrated was that gum chewing increases energy expenditure by 20 calories an hour. Now, we were not claiming that chewing gum helps you lose weight. What we were actually, and in fact we actually got offers of funding from the chewing gum companies, we got letters of hate from the American Dental Association, TMJ. You'd be absolutely amazed how torridly abusive one's colleagues can be when they want to be. Perhaps you wouldn't be amazed. Perhaps that's for the 3rd novel, I think, Diana. But anyway, but the point is that trivial movements burn 20 calories an hour, and that's the point we're trying to make. Make lots of these trivial, and I can look at the audience, there's somebody bobbing their head, who's actually just fallen asleep. Oh, okay. And there's somebody scratching their hair over there. Those trivial movements, because we do lots of them during the day, cumulatively can dramatically impact your NEAT. The most important of all of these activities, however, is this one, ambulation. This is walking at 1 mile an hour. It's called shopping pace. That's literally what it's called. This is purposeful walking, 2 miles an hour going to a meeting, and of course this is late for a meeting. The issue being that if I, therefore, leave work as I would normally do at about 3 in the afternoon, and I go home and watch TV stupefied, watching pizza until I go to sleep at about 11, I can potentially burn in an evening, 45, 50 calories an hour. Conversely, if I were to go home and actually get round to painting the basement and moving the furniture out of the boxes where it currently is in my apartment in Cleveland, I could potentially burn 100 to 220 calories an hour, and for that same evening, instead of watching TV stupefied, I could burn 500 calories. So it's that combination of our jobs that render us sedentary or active, and also our choice of leisure activities that enable us in an evening to burn 50 calories a night versus 500 calories a night with more energetic or neater pursuits. It's fantastic, isn't it? Fantastic. I mean, it's just really, really interesting. If the calories we burn through non-exercise activity are so variable, one person of similar size burning 2,000 calories a day more than somebody of a smaller size, because of the difference in variability in work and play, is that variability in calorie burn important in gaining weight? Well, we took lean, healthy volunteers and we overfed them. And I will tell you the first thing, it's incredibly easy to overfeed people. And what we did is for the first 3 weeks, we established exactly how many calories a person required to keep their body weight stable. And we do that by giving them every single food that they require. We weigh absolutely everything. We measure their body weight and body composition and keep it absolutely steady. And we know precisely, within about 80 calories, how much food it's necessary to keep somebody at an absolutely steady body weight. Then what we did is we took that number, let's say for me it was 2,700 calories a day, and we overfed them by an extra 1,000 calories a day. And we did that continuously for 8 weeks. So that each person in this study got fed in excess of 56,000 calories. And here's what we found. Here is fat gain. Those people who overate 56,000 calories and put every single calorie, because that's really basically what it proved to be, every single calorie they deposited in body fat, those people failed to increase their NEAT, their non-exercise activity thermogenesis. In contrast, when we took healthy volunteers and we overfed them by 1,000 calories a day, there was one individual, fortunate you might say in modern society, who gained almost no body fat at all. He burnt off all the extra fuel. That person burnt off the extra fuel by switching on their NEAT, their non-exercise activity thermogenesis. They didn't go to the gym, they didn't jog, they didn't buy any Nike equipment, not that there's anything wrong with Nike equipment, but what they did is somehow spontaneously become more active in such a way that they burnt off all these extra calories. Well, how on earth did they do that? Well, remember the other slide, chewing gum, perhaps they chewed a lot of gum. I mean, that is a lot of gum, 800 calories a day. Or perhaps they did that other thing. The other thing that's a really powerful way of burning calories. They did lots of little walks. So we repeated the overfeeding experiment. Here is fat gain, and here is the change in NEAT. But the change in NEAT is through change in walking. So, completely different experiment, completely different subjects. When we overfed people, those people who don't gain any weight with overfeeding are those people who spontaneously get up out of their chairs and walk off the extra fuel. Those people, if you like, less fortunate, I suppose I could really act this out. Those people less fortunate who, when they overfeed, take to their chairs. I mean, the stage was specifically set up for me, and I really appreciate that. Those people actually overfeed and actually take to their chairs are those people who gain all of that excess food with overfeeding. That walking modulation is incredibly powerful. And what's also reassuring is other scientists then repeated our experiments, and I hate to tell you this, but found the same. And Diana actually published this fantastic paper, and there will be a test on this for those of you in her undergraduate class. Here's the equation. But the point is, the equation tells you that there's an easily memorable similarity between all the different experiments. In other words, these are highly consistent findings that can be explained with really trivial mathematics. So, think about the coffee shop for a second, where you go and have coffee, you're sitting there, and there are... Did the lights just go out? Is that why I'm completely phasing out? Yeah, the lights just... Hello, everyone. Hi. Gosh, that's really cool. Anyway, nice to meet you all. Thank you for inviting me to Montclair University. So, if you go to the coffee shop and you sort of sit there and you kind of look around, you'll see two types of people for the sake of this discussion. One person is sort of sitting there with their on a textbook, working diligently. And another person is getting up, getting the sugar, coming down, looking up, they forgot the textbook, and they rushed out to the car. Not that many of you have cars, or bicycle, and coming down again, and up frenetic. Now, overlay that with this idea that you start overfeeding. Some people can switch on that freneticness and burn off these calories. Other people cannot. So the idea then becomes is that frenetic movement you see in the coffee shop isn't just random, it's being driven by brain mechanisms, and we're really interested in that. This rat is called Mark. All the rats in our experiments are called Mark. He's not wearing a religious head covering. What this actually is a needle, and we actually tried to do this in Mayo Clinic medical students. It's a needle penetrating the paraventricular nucleus of his hypothalamus, going right into the center of his brain. We tried it on 3 medical students. 2 of them did really well, and one of them became a dentist. Anyway, so and the idea of this is that by injecting, you've got Lana here. She's got Mark's head between her fingers, and you can't see in her fingers, but she's got a hair-thin cannula, a hair-thin little tube, and she's injecting right into the center of Mark's brain these chemicals that we think could be brain mediators of NEAT. I will tell you one thing we discovered after Lana left is that the reason all these rats were called Mark was because her ex-boyfriend was called Mark. And she was elated on sacking day. For all of you in the biomedical sciences, you know what sacking day is. It's where you chop off, the animals are sacrificed. Anyway, she's got Mark's head between her fingers. She's injecting chemicals right into the center of her brain, and she couldn't do this in life, but she certainly did it in the lab. She then encapsulated Mark in such a way that he couldn't get away from her. And she did this too in the lab, but she couldn't do at his home. She videotaped every single movement that Mark made in response. Here's what we found. We did multiple experiments. These are published by Koji, who was a very interesting chap. He came from Japan to join us. He fell in love with Chagall and motorcycles. Go figure. Colleen, on the other hand, now runs her own laboratory somewhere else in Kent State. Where's my little red dot? Oh, there it is. Okie dokie, these rats here are inbred for leanness. They're repeatedly bred over 49 generations for leanness, and this gentleman here is overbred for obesity. The red is lean, the blue is inbred for obesity. The first thing you see is the obese rats have lower NEAT at baseline than the lean rats. Now this is going to change your view of the whole world, and certainly your view of next time you go into the coffee shop. Look at this obese rat here. And what Lana is doing is injecting serial doses, at higher and higher doses of orexin, which is an arousal protein. And here, on this axis, is the animal's NEAT. So she injects the dose, the lowest dose, and the animal becomes more active. She injects a higher dose, the obese animal becomes more active, and more active, right? But what's really, really interesting about this is when she injected the obese animals here, right, this change, this increase from there to there is far less than this increase from here to there. That was easy. The point being that the animals inbred for obesity, remember we tried to do experiments in humans, but we couldn't, so we have to resort to rats in this case until our next round of experiments. The animals inbred for obesity had diminished responses to the brain stimuli promoting NEAT, promoting activity. The animals, on the other hand, who were frenetic, are those animals with a far higher responsiveness in their brains, right at the center of their brains, to the same amount of chemical that promoted NEAT. And so, when we repeatedly injected orexin into the brains of these animals, they progressively and systematically lost weight, as shown here. That's an amazing idea that this movement you see amongst different people, as we look at the jobs people choose are not random acts, but they're driven by brain chemistry that we never thought existed before. I mean, like totally cool. That little movement you're doing with your hand, those scratches, everyone's starting moving their hands. It's like weird, eh? But all those little movements are not just random, they're powered. They're powered by brain. So if that's the case, if you've got brain powering these differences in NEAT, the ability to lose weight and not lose weight is need to be important in obesity. So we went into the underwear industry. And I never thought I'd go into the underwear industry, but science is a marvelous and exciting enterprise. And underwear it is. And of course, coming from the Mayo Clinic, I'm showing the underwear as overwear, and I'm sure you can work out what the holes are for. And if you can't work out what the holes are for, it's time to do Bio 101 again. On the magic underwear that were worn for 10 days at a time, we've done many, many subjects. They have these sensors here. These sensors here detect body posture. Sit, stand, sit, stand, and lie. Right? Sit, stand, lie. And everything in between, the rolling, the pitching, the rolling. And it's really, so every half a second of a day for 10 days continuously, we can see all the postures and activities of people day and night. And I tell you, it's really, really interesting what people get up to. In addition to knowing all the different postures and maneuvers that people do day and night, we also know, associated with it, all of the activity, all of the inertia that their body makes as well. We took those same underwear and we went into Jamaica. We were working in rural and urban environments in Kingston. And these are individuals working in the fields in rural Jamaica. And we got lots of stories. We had this guy arrested in the fields because he was wearing all the equipment and he was thought to be carrying a bomb. That day was excluded from the data analysis. Here are their counterparts in Kingston, in Jamaica, who have urbanized, who've gone into Kingston and are now working in factories and offices. Here are counterparts in North America, lean individuals working in US offices and individuals with obesity here working in US offices. And the point I'd like to make is this. It is entirely capable for the human to walk twice as much as they do each day than they do currently. It is entirely possible to live sitting half as much time per day than we do currently. And so all of a sudden is this amazing therapeutic option for us to get people, get them moving. So how do you do that? Well, our first way of starting to decode this is to build technologies. We really couldn't dress the entire US population in magic underwear. Not because I've got a problem with underwear, it's just that the cost of each unit was about $7,000. And so the first thing we wanted to do is provide and develop scalable technologies. This slide shows you some of the examples of things we worked on. This is an MP3 player earpiece, and the entire technology, movement technology, is embedded into the earpiece there. We then exported that technology via a collaboration with Apple, who ultimately collaborated with Nike, to insert the technology into shoes, so that all of a sudden moving, doesn't matter what you do, but moving all of a sudden because it's Apple is cool, right? We took the same technology that was then started to become popularized and we wanted to develop a system that enabled us to measure NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, anywhere in the world without access to a computer. So we worked with the US Army under Army funding to develop this technology here. This enabled us to measure NEAT 10 times a second continuously for a year without a battery changer, without a computer. And we were like, can you imagine? All of a sudden we get all the answers. We can go to Sub-Saharan Africa, we can go to Jamaica, we can go to China, we can go to USA, we can go everywhere, and all of a sudden we get this fantastic data. However, the NIH insisted that we trial the units at the National Institute of Health in Washington. They gave them out to 20 10-year-old children, and not a single unit came back working. There's no happy ending to that story, by the way. That simply is the story and the death of the technology. We took the same technology, and what we then did is combine it with the cell phone. The idea being that what we want to do is to create the capability of social networking physical activity. So instead of there being a virtual web, there was actually a physical web too. You and I could compete physically actively over the telephone, so to speak. A dream, perhaps. We then took that same Army technology and said, can we actually make a unit that isn't destroyed by children, that actually works and is actually mass scalable? And so we developed the Groove device. This was with a collaboration. I have no conflict of interest. I have interest, but no conflict of interest. So all of this was going on as we were building these multitude of technologies. The G3 came out. And one of the most exciting experiences of my professional career is to take the G3 into the lab, take a hacksaw and hack it to pieces. And what do you see here? Here is the master chip, and here here is a Kyonix 3-axis MEMS triaxial accelerometer. Now what that is there are sets of interdigitating teeth, that go backwards and forwards, and they're made of silicon. And in fact, there's a third dimension that goes on top of them. And all inside this silicon chip is this phenomenal technology that through the living on the motherboard of the cell phone, it's actually on the motherboard of all of these phones. And what it actually does on the cell phone is when you turn it and the picture orientates, that's what's detecting it. It's detecting the acceleration of the Earth's gravitational field. All of a sudden, the technologies for measuring NEAT in a mass scalable style were becoming available. But were they valid? So here is the G3 Kyonix accelerometer brought into the laboratory. We retro pull the data. You're allowed to do that if you own the phone or you've cut it up. And here you see fantastic validation data. These sensors are meticulously beautifully precise and accurate. So we had the technologies for measurement. Could we start deploying neatology, neat techniques? So our first stab at this was to take a 35,000 square foot office space and render it neat. And what we did, we took out all the tables, all the chairs, all the walls, all the partitions, so on and so forth, and we redesigned the office. And what you see here is an office where obviously the standard operating system is walking and working. There are treadmills and desk treadmills designed in Germany, and you can sit, you are allowed to sit, but there you are. Sitting is sort of the naughty thing to do. It's right at the back. It's right at the back. Here's a walking track, beautiful light transition. We did a lot of sound technology. We did air conditioning, the whole thing. And then all of a sudden, we actually have an office space that enabled people to move during their day. 305 people came up into this space and started working there, and most importantly, productivity did not decline, it improved. We knew it was feasible to do this. We then collaborated, which is a big part of all of this. We then collaborated with industry. I have no conflict of interest here either. And this is the Steelcase walking desk. And what's important about this is if you think about it, if you take a regular treadmill and bring it into a regular US office, and people go flying off the back, they start running at 6 miles an hour, they go, and they hit their head on something, the whole program is over. However, when Steelcase wrote all the rules and regulations regarding how to build and deploy these things in real-world offices, build the unit, this thing only goes at less than 2 miles an hour, all the hand grips are in there. It's very, very important to build these collaborations because otherwise these kind of programs fail. So this was one with Steelcase. But you don't need to buy a $5,000 desk. This is a stepping device, and here it goes underneath. And this is a standard office desk. This thing is now, it goes under the desk, and you get a phone call, you pull it out, you go stepping away. There's the same sensing technology embedded into it, so at the end of the day, you get a printout as to how much NEAT you actually did while on the telephone, right? And all these little tools together start enabling us to promote NEAT in real-world offices. And most importantly of all, and I can see the dean is there, no chairs make for shorter meetings. Walk and talk meetings, the Canadian found, are about 10 minutes shorter than average meetings, and people do not fall asleep during walking meetings. It's entirely possible to hold a lecture such as this with people walking, and then here it's the same thing. They're attending a lecture, and all these people are walking away, and of course attendance and wakefulness was superior. This chap did his radio show, cycling away for 4 months. He lost 45 pounds. He was in Australia. And the only point I'd like to make is each one of these little gadgets and approaches and tricks and so on, we bring into the laboratory and validate. And what you see are two things on this slide. Subjects here, calories an hour here. Whether you're stepping on the telephone, walking, doing your email, walking and talking meeting, all of these things on average burn about, you can see here, 100, 120, 150 calories an hour. But that is not the important part of the slide. The important part of the slide is this. WHO Class 1 obesity. The people who can engage in these programs are people with obesity. So that I've been into offices where you walk into the office and the CEO of the company who's a marathon runner is having a walk and talk meeting with a lady who's 100 pounds overweight. What's really important about this neat way of deployment is that it does not exclude people with obesity. You do it during your day, and you can close that 2.25 hour gap without leaving work. And now then subsequently, not now, over many years, we started deploying these concepts in multi-layered ways, right into real US corporations. We had old plans laid out, and it could be everything from desks to moving the trash cans further away, to having walking tracks laid down. This is a walking track laid down with tape, and all of these things together combined create these dynamic, quite exciting offices to be in. We brought this into 55 US corporations, we tested it in multiple places, and everywhere we went, and this wasn't actually by our choice, this is actually by happenstance, everywhere we went insisted or we collaborated to deploy prospective studies using platinum-grade technologies that we bring from the laboratories. Here's an example of one program. You can see here the people with obesity lose weight, the lean people lose weight, everybody loses weight, and importantly, fat-free mass, lean mass, muscle mass increases as people engage in these programs. And so what we're learning as we go from company to company is the capability of deploying these kind of programs could be exceedingly successful. One point I'd like to make, which is actually really interesting, is you can't just go into a corporation, a company, big or small, with a health program. You can't do it. What you have to do is you have to go in with your own economists to look at ROI, return on investment. Companies won't invest in these kind of technologies unless they see profit for themselves. And by profit, I mean reduction in healthcare costs, improvement in productivity, and so on and so forth. In addition, we go with our own lawyers and we go in with our own management teams. How do you interlace these kind of activities into the everyday workflow? It's critically important. We also work with the IT. We have our own IT specialists. We have medical records specialists so that the data goes straight into medical records. And we use mobile platforms. We have mobile blood testing and so on and so forth. And so it's one thing to go in with the behavior science, the exercise, the physiology. We do the cafeterias and all of that, right? But the trick is you have to be so you have to have a multifaceted team that can attack or address all of the issues across the workforce deployment system. And what we found subsequently, I think this is quite important, certainly for how our science is developing, is that as we're in the office space, we're literally in people's offices testing their blood, encouraging them to move every single day, and we're working with our clients for 2 minutes every single day, we actually have a health presence. And so what happened over time is we gradually got asked to deploy pre-diabetes screening, diabetes screening, blood pressure treatment, and now ultimately bone health and osteoporosis prevention. And all of a sudden we realized we're actually deploying a multi-modular health system right where people work. And in the environment of healthcare reform in the United States, this is a very interesting and attractive model for delivering healthcare. No doctor's office, the doctor comes to you. Now, it's great to do all of this in big companies and corporations and so on and so forth, but we started to get very heavily criticized. How about the kids? All this technology, all of these grants and all of this activity, what happened to the children? I will tell you something I think is quite important. Having worked out how to do all of this in big offices enabled us to far more easily enter the school space because we knew what didn't work and the safety issues in particular. So what we did is, again, with collaborators, these were big building firms. We worked with a construction company, worked with Apple Computer, again. And what we did is we took a 65,000 square foot space and we got a group of middle school children to come in to this space and design their dream school based on this concept of NEAT. They came up with this, which was a village-like environment. It was built around, it was like a Socratic learning model. You sort of wander around the village, you learn English in a little town hall, you do mathematics in the hockey arena right at the back here. And this is their favored classroom. This is actually a hockey arena. And for those of you worried, it's not the base is not made of ice. I mean, you haven't got children learning on ice here. This is actually this sort of Teflon material. And you see here that you've got nets, you've got these whiteboards, you've got lots of portable electronics. And what you see is kids given the opportunity to sit there. We developed sort of these seating things at the back, stand. These whiteboards weigh less than 2 pounds, and they carry them around the classroom with them as necessary. And all of a sudden, you've got this very dynamic learning style. We also deploy pre-existing technologies. This is Dance Dance Revolution, one of my favorites. I'm terrible at it, but I enjoy it. Well, I don't enjoy it actually, but it's kind of fun to do and get humiliated by children. And so we use a lot of off-the-shelf stuff too. It's also one of the tricks. This boy is particularly interesting. He became, and this you see all the time, whether you do it in workplaces or in schools, he became the local leader. He just took on this mission for this class I'm showing you. And he ended up actually visiting the CEO of General Mills and asking him face to face, why is it that you don't allow us as kids to choose how much sugar we put in our own cereal? Why don't you make it a separate packet so that we can add our own sugar? And he became like this sort of general for the weight management program of his own class. It was like really, really interesting. This girl is standing in front of the desk she designed. It became productized for schools. And what we do is bring all of this back to the scientific domain. We attach the sensors to the kids. And what we find is the need of these children here is far greater than in the traditional classroom. And it's not because they have lots of fancy computers. It's because they have these activity-permissive environments, just as during the summer vacation. This is an example of exactly the same concept that was taken to Idaho Falls. And what's important is all these desks were built, the classrooms were transformed, and the important message here is this lady. The entire program was run by her. She is the mother of this boy. And the point being is these local community-driven programs to promote activity in classrooms have multiplied. This is the way to do it. It's not one center of excellence of pushing all this stuff out. It's a matter of people picking up the ideas and sort of developing the systems to deploy it. This is a program in Milan where the bus drivers actually walk kids to school rather than driving them when the weather's fine. And this is very important. This is a very important project because what happened was they saved money on gas because the buses weren't being driven, and the insurance company gave them a cut for every day that the buses weren't driven because they didn't need to be insured. So this wasn't even cost neutral, this was directly cost saving. Bouncy chairs, they work too. And the important point is, just like you always get asked productivity in corporate programs, just to get asked productivity in corporate programs, in these school programs, there are about now 130 of these active schools, MOOC schools. There are multiple schools in Germany that do this. There are 1 in 10 new schools in Sweden that are built to promote physical activity. Every single school I have data on, or at least I've been exposed to the data, show improvement in educational attainment by about 10 to 20%. The only quick point I'd like to make is having the scientific capability of proving or demonstrating the validity of these approaches is really important. So we've developed an entire laboratory that is mobile. This is a DEXA scanner that enables us to measure body composition. Diana, this would be useful for you, on a bus. And this bus can be driven by anybody. It's the entire laboratory on a bus. So any school that wants to evaluate its program can now do that. Okay, offices, schools, how about me? Well, us. So we were developing all these corporate programs. We were having fantastic success with sustained weight loss. And we were asked, well, why can't, we were being asked, can we make copies of the program for wives, relatives, children? And so here was the program. We already had it. And so Random House very kindly published a book. And this enabled other people who wanted to pick up on these programs to take advantage. Then there was the movie. Then the Groove device was started to be sold in the general marketplace. Dr. Oz wore it, and once that happens, you're done. I mean, the world will change. And this is the personalized website. The idea of this physical web exists. Remember I mentioned this idea that the G3 and the G4 have these embedded triaxial accelerometers. This is, I think, quite an important point in all of this. So in January of this year, 2009, what year are we in now? 2010. Yeah. In January of 2010, on almost no budget, this at University of Houston, one of our collaborators, released the walk and play app that we developed with them. No budget at all. For 4 months, just by network, this enables people to compete in that physical activity game we were talking about using free pre-existing technology. After 4 months, there were 7,500 users. Business Week named it as one of their top 4 apps, and 48 hours later, there were 28,000 users. We were able to pull the raw accelerometry data from all 28,000 users, and you see here calories per minute and a frequency bar. The data look exactly the same as our $7,000 magic underwear data. So what's really powerful about that is if somebody had said to me when I was doing my PhD, we were talking about this earlier, I was building devices during my PhD that blew up laboratories and caused terrible, terrible problems for me and my supervisor. If somebody said to me, Jim, you're going to be able to deliver a meat sensing technology to 28,000 people at almost no cost, I would have said, you're crazy. But look, all of a sudden, now we can do just that. All of a sudden, we have this capability of sharing our physical activity amongst ourselves, social networking, physical networking. All these accelerometers are going everywhere. There's going to be a physical map of physical activity. And then the world can change, you see. And we don't forget food. This is an app called Fritter. And the idea here is you're eating a meal, we validate it, you take a picture of your food, and other people can add comments on it. This is my food, this is not a stool, it is a bar, or it's a little cake thing. And what happens is people make incredibly rude comments about what you're eating, but you certainly become aware of eating airport food almost 5 days a week. And lastly, there is the suit. And as I said, my thanks to Matt Damon for coming down to the Mayo Clinic to test it for us. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I'd like to first of all thank you for coming and for staying seated for so terribly long. It must be awful for you. Because I'm at it. The human evolved over 2.25 million years to walk. That is the natural way of the human being to be. We walked across the world, we explored our universe, we built shelter on our feet, we invented with our hands mobily. And only over the last 200 years, we've been sentenced, we've been scrunched into the chair. We're just not built to do it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the call for the next decade, for the next 200 years, is for us to get up, to move, and be neat. Thank you. Lovely evening. Have an active evening.